We will call this workshop session of the Del Mar College Board of Regents to order at 9 a.m. It is Tuesday, September 8th, and we are meeting by video and teleconference. The members of the public can view this meeting in real time. It's being aired in real time on the DMC website, as well as an opportunity to call in a toll-free number and following along in that regard. I'm going to call the roll of the board, so if you would unmute your mics. Regent Adami?
Here.
Regent Averett?
Here.
Regent Bennett?
Here.
Regent Estrada?
Here.
Regent Hutchison?
I'm here.
Regent Salinas? Regent Sherwood?
Here.
I'm Carol Scott. We have a quorum and can conduct business. Would you please join me in a moment of silence? Thank you. I will lead the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And please join me in reading the Del Mar College Vision Statement. Del Mar College will be the premier choice for life-changing educational opportunities provided by responsive, innovative faculty and staff who empower students to improve local and global communities. Thank you very much. As I said, the college is streaming live audio and video from the official Board of Regents meeting on the college's website in real time, with the exception of portions of the meeting that may be closed session by statute. The public had an opportunity to provide comment in advance of this meeting, or to register to provide comment. We did not have anyone register for public comment this morning. So we will jump straight into our agenda. It is a full agenda this morning. We are going to talk about two very important pieces that the board has asked for additional time to really delve into these two matters. One regarding the key performance indicators around our strategic plan, and the second would be the opening of our fiscal 21 policy review project, kicking that off this morning. So first I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Escamilla for his opening comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Regents and everyone. I know there's a big team out there that's getting ready to present the first full report for our strategic plan. And as you'll recall, we have completed the first cycle, if you will, the first part of a 5-year plan, being the past academic year. I'll remind you that we began this process in earnest in early 2018, when we all came together as a board, as a college, and as a community, I would say, and put together what we are regarding as the most student-focused plan that has been written in recent history anyway. And that being said, I want to let you all know that it's a very extensive plan that we put, a comprehensive plan that we put together. And as such, for today, there are over 30 KPIs, key performance indicators, in this entire plan. And today we will be taking the first two goals. And I think there's 11 KPIs, maybe 12. So about a dozen KPIs for us to review today in depth, and it'll take some time. That being said, we have a team standing by. This presentation will be led by Dr. Christina Wilson, and there are several others. The entire executive team will be in support to answer specifics. For the sake of being judicious with your time, we have scripted as much as possible to be as efficient as we possibly can. That being said, I want to thank everybody for getting us here to this very early stage in the 5-year process. It's still very early. There are certain KPIs Well, it'll be self-explanatory here in just a little bit, but thank you all for the work that we've put into this team. And Dr. Wilson, if you'll take it away from here, we'll jump right into the process here.
As Dr. Wilson is preparing, I just want to ask a quick question of her. Please let us know how you would like to engage questions or comments from the board as you go through the presentation. Are there stopping points? Do you want us to wave our hand, unmute our mic? How would you like us to handle questions or comments as you go through the presentation?
At the end of each KPI, there's a few slides for each KPI. And as I get to the end of each KPI, I'll pause for questions. But if something does come up, feel free to wave, feel free to ask a question, feel free to ask as they come up. But I will pause at the end of each KPI.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair and esteemed Regents. We will be starting this morning with a workshop on our key performance indicators, also known as KPIs. These KPIs were established as part of the development of our new strategic plan. They help us to measure our progress towards meeting our goals for both student success and college-wide improvements over the course of 5 years. Jessica, can I go to the next slide, please? Today, we will be taking a close look at the first 2 out of the 6 goals of our strategic plan. Goal 1, completion, and Goal 2, recruitment and persistence. Each goal has a set of KPIs, and for each KPI, we will be discussing the most recent data and comparing this to our thresholds and targets. We will also be looking at trends and how the college has performed over time. And finally, for each of the goals, we will discuss the college's strategies for meeting the KPI thresholds and targets. My colleagues, Dr. John DeHalka and Dr. Rito Silva, will be contributing to the discussion on the strategies for each goal.
Christina, your microphone went mute.
Hello, can you hear me now?
You're good now.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. We will start the review of each KPI with a look at our most recent data, what you may call a data snapshot. Each KPI has an identified threshold and target. These are new terms that we have recently begun using as part of our evaluation processes. We are required to set thresholds and targets for our student achievement indicators by our regional accreditor, SAC-COC. Thresholds are the college's acceptable levels of achievement, what you may call our minimum target. Thresholds that are not met indicate that additional activities and/or resources are needed to address this aspect of student success. Targets are the college's aspirational objectives for improvement, which you may call our stretch goals. The college's strategic planning committee established the thresholds and targets by reviewing data for at least 5 years. When reviewing the data snapshots, you'll see that the thresholds and targets are color-coded. Green meaning that the threshold or target was met, and red meaning that the threshold or target was not met. It is a good practice to celebrate our wins as a college in the areas in which we are strong. It is an even better practice to identify the areas in which we can improve. Next slide, please. The purpose of monitoring our KPIs is improvement. No matter how strong of a college that we are, and no matter our amount of wins, we must always seek to improve and ensure that we are meeting the ever-evolving needs of our students and our community. Today, we will discuss where we are now, what our most current data shows, and whether we are meeting our thresholds. We will discuss how we compare, both to ourselves over time and to our community college peers. We will also discuss where we want to be, our targets, the direction that we wish to go. We will be reviewing a lot of data today, looking at the KPIs from multiple angles. Chairwoman Scott frequently reminds us that we need to tell our own story. Our data is only valuable if we understand the context in which it occurs. And I believe that today's workshop will go a long way to help us to understand and tell our exceptional Del Mar College story. Next slide, please. For each KPI, we will compare ourselves to our large Texas college peers. It is important that we understand who makes up this peer group. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board groups colleges based on their enrollment. The most recent fall enrollment for our peer group ranges from 8,000 students at Navarro College to 19,000 students at Blaine College. It's important to recognize that while comparing ourselves to our peer group is valuable, there are many differences between our colleges that are not accounted for in enrollment-based grouping. Differences of regional needs, economic circumstances, and cultural factors mean that in many cases, we are not comparing apples to apples. There is no college out there that is just like Del Mar College. However, knowing where we stand in comparison to other colleges of similar size can provide us with some excellent context. Next slide, please. To get us started with Goal 1, completion, I will ask Dr. Rito Silva, Vice President of Student Services, to provide us with an introduction.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Good morning, Madam Chair and Board of Regents. Before we begin to take a deep dive into our KPIs within our strategic plan, we want to take a moment to reflect on the years of work leading to this presentation. The Del Mar College team has been using these data points for the last few years as a map to create intentional strategies to address these opportunities. Starting 3 years ago, we began preparing for guided pathways with the intent of refining and easing a student's academic journey by clarifying the courses needed to graduate with the least amount of hours and debts. The end goal was to decrease the hours to completion and credit to completion for our students. The Del Mar College team began writing the Title V HSI Sender Grant 2 years ago, which built upon the work done through guided pathways. The strategies for the grant was to provide uniform advising training for faculty and staff, add 4 additional embedded advisors, a career assessment tool, and the goal for this initiative was to increase persistence and transfer rate to our students. Our recently submitted Quality Enhancement Plan, our QEP, also supports student success and completion by clarifying career goals, offering effective advising practices, improving student engagement, and strengthening transfer pathways, and utilizing innovative technology. As you can tell, this work has been aligned and built upon each other to properly leverage our assets and maximize our resources to meet our student success objectives. Next, I'll turn it over to Dr. Wilson, who's going to review our first 7 KPIs for Goal 1.
Thank you, Dr. Silva. Next slide, please. Goal 1 has 7 KPIs. KPIs 3 and 4 are closely related and will be presented together. Each KPI tells a key piece of our story, and we will be looking at each one from several angles. Next slide, please. KPI 1 is the number of degrees and certificates awarded by credit programs each year. The targets for this KPI are aligned with the state's 60x30 TX strategic plan. Within the plan, the state focuses on the number of degrees and certificates earned by African American, Hispanic, and economically disadvantaged students in order to ensure equity among student groups. The college is purposefully tracking the success of these groups in support of the state's plan. You will see that our thresholds and targets are color-coded. In 2019, we had a slight dip in our numbers, which resulted in the college not meeting its thresholds for all students and for economically disadvantaged students. The college met its threshold for African American students and has already met the target for 2020. We also met our threshold for Hispanic students. This is a snapshot format that you'll be seeing for each of the KPIs, and I'm going to pause here for questions. Hearing none, can we have the next slide, please? Here's a visual representation of our 5-year trends. Over the past 5 years, we have seen a 31% increase in the number of degrees and certificates awarded. This rate of increase is higher than that of our large college peers at 19.5% and higher than the rate of increase for all Texas colleges at just over 21%. Visually, you'll see the target that we have set for ourselves for 2020 as indicated by the blue star. Our threshold line is indicated by the red dotted line. As you can see, the threshold and target that we have set for ourselves is quite ambitious and is based on our consistent growth rate in recent years. A question that we asked ourselves is, why did our numbers decrease? We currently do not have coordinating board certified numbers for 2020, but based on the preliminary review, we believe that our numbers will be similar to 2019. A recent change in college procedure will impact the number of degrees and certificates awarded. Previously, we allowed students to earn multiple degrees, even if the degrees were very similar. We now require that there be at least a 20% difference between degrees in order for a student to earn multiple degrees. It is a requirement of SAC-COC that we ensure the integrity of our degree requirements. We do not wish to award a student a second degree if there is a substantial overlap between the degree requirements. Additionally, we wish to incentivize transfer rather than encourage the earning of multiple associate degrees, as this can have a negative impact on financial aid eligibility. Even though our overall numbers of degrees and certificates awarded have decreased slightly, the number of students earning awards has consistently increased. The numbers that you see on your screen include multiple awards, but when looking at the number of students earning degrees and certificates, this number has consistently increased. I will pause here for questions.
I have a question, Dr. Wilson. Considering that we are just one graduation ceremony away from ending 2020, do our unaudited numbers, you said that they look to be similar. Do you have a sense of how much COVID has impacted both our spring and our summer graduations and how it might impact our December graduation?
We do have a sense for what we've seen in our recent graduation ceremonies. We do think that our 2020 numbers will be very similar to our 2019 numbers, somewhere around 1,800 students graduating. As far as the December graduates, I don't have that information at this time, but I'll defer to anyone who may have that information on the enrollment management team.
Dr. Wilson, just what you're saying, yeah, we don't have the information. We can definitely get that information, but I agree with you. I think we'll be about the same as we did this year. I would have been maybe a little bit higher if it wasn't for COVID, but the numbers that are coming in seems to be pretty consistent, as you mentioned, Dr. Wilson.
That's interesting. I would have thought that COVID would have more dramatically impacted our comparison between 2019 and 2020 numbers. So, and these are academic year numbers, not calendar year numbers, correct? Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So
there were some very targeted efforts when COVID hit to reach out to those students who are very close to completion and to make sure that they had what they needed in order to graduate. So even though we are in unprecedented times right now, I think that help that was provided, that one-on-one assistance, I think may have gone a long way.
Okay, so our December 20 graduation will actually count in our academic 21 year numbers, not in our academic 20 numbers.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
The
other thing, Madam Chair, is that where COVID began and where it is currently, if you think of the academic calendar, there are three very different times, and I would dare say an unusual time, three very unusual times. The end of a spring semester, a summer semester and the beginning of a fall semester so far. So that's a red apple, a green apple, and a purple apple, if you will. And so, as such, it is proven to none of the three. They're probably more different than they are alike, and they are presenting challenges that we did not expect. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that coming up.
I have a question also, or just a comment really. Unless you think it would make it too complicated, the statement you made about the number of actual students earning awards as a third line on here, just a line showing that increase, I think would be a nice context for people to understand that that increase in students.
Thank you, Regent Sherwood. And I can tell you, I do have our most recent numbers. The number of students earning degrees and certificates without duplicates in 2016-2017 was 1,498 students. The subsequent year, 17-18, 1,593, and in 18-19, 1,621. So in some cases, when you, all of us participate in graduation, and we'll see that students earn stackable certificates, associate degrees, which are wonderful. But we also want to see the overall impact on the numbers of students. So thank you for that recommendation. In the future, I'll include that in the slides.
One other thing I'd like to add, Regents, is that these are credit degrees and certificates only. There's a whole other side of the coin that we're going to get to a little bit later as well, but these are credit degrees and certificates, so largely the ones that you see walking across the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Escamilla. Hearing no further questions, can I have the next slide, please? To tell our story comprehensively, we also have to look at the numbers of certifications issued by our continuing education programs, as Dr. Escamilla mentioned. This slide provides a summary of the completion certifications issued during the past 3 years for some of our most popular programs: health, safety, and certifications from the National Center for Construction and Education Research, also known as NCCER. Additionally, the Rebuild Texas program has provided the opportunity for individuals to gain skills in the construction and building industry. This is not all of our completions, but a summary, a snapshot summary from continuing education. Okay. Any further questions on KPI 1? Thank you. Can I have the next slide? Our next KPI is graduation rates. This KPI differs from the first KPI in that it follows a particular cohort of students, not all students. In this case, we are looking at first-time in college students, also known as FTICs, enrolled on a full-time basis. Cohort tracking is an effective way to establish rates, but it really only monitors a small percentage of our overall student body. Our 3-year graduation rate for 2019 tracks full-time FTIC students who first enrolled at Del Mar College in 2016. This cohort consists of 562 students. The cohorts for the 4-year graduation rate and the 6-year graduation rate also consist of around 500 students. This KPI looks at the rate of students who graduated from Del Mar College or any other Texas public institution within the timeframes listed. As you can see, we have met our thresholds for our 3-year, 4-year, and 6-year graduation rates. We have also met our target for 2024 for our 6-year graduation rate. You will also see in this table how we compare to our large college peers. Next slide, please. Here is a visual representation of our 5-year trends. Our thresholds and targets are described on the right-hand side. You will see that overall, we have experienced upward trends for all 3 rates during the last 5 years. Okay. Next slide, please. Here you will see the details of our graduation rates, for Del Mar College, our large college peers, and all Texas colleges. What is important to notice here is the rate of change over this time period, as highlighted in yellow in the right-hand column. This column describes the percentage point change over the last 5 years. We are always seeking to improve, and it is helpful to see if we are improving at a similar rate to our peers. As you can see, the change that our college has experienced is comparable to that of our peers. And I'm going to pause now for questions on KPI 2.
Yes, ma'am. That 4-year rate and 6-year rate, that's cumulative, isn't it? That 29.6%, that includes the 4-year at 21.9%. Am I correct in understanding that?
Regent Bennett, these are actually different cohorts. So this is our most recent data up to 2019. So the 6-year graduation rate looks at students that began in 2013. The 4-year graduation rate looks at students that began in 2015. So they are actually different cohorts of students.
I see. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I don't want to skip over, this has always confused me, and it took me a while to really absorb this. Because this is dealing with first time in college students, and this particular cohort is full-time first time in college student, given that 78% of our students attend part-time, this cohort is an incredibly small sampling. So it really is not an institutional representation of what our students are doing. It is a very, very small slice, almost a snapshot kind of picture because of the small cohort. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our full-time FTIC cohort sizes are usually around 500 students. That is a very, very small sample. We continue to monitor this as part of our KPIs because there's still value in looking to see how those students are doing. But we have to keep it in context, the fact that this is actually only looking at a very small population. That's why we look at other indicators as well, such as the number of degrees and certificates awarded, and the other indicators we'll see in a few minutes to give us a more full picture of what's going on.
Regents, these cohorts are what we call purposely selected samples. And of course, we're working with the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board on this. This is the indicator, the common denominator, if you will, for indicators to measure at least this aspect of performance for all 50 community colleges. The other piece to this is that when we're looking at this, there's many other things going on outside of this, and when we get into transfer rates here in just a little bit, it's going to tell a different part of the story. What I'm hoping is that at the end of this presentation, and even days to come and weeks to come, that we look at the totality of everything that is going on out there. Side note: we are working with the coordinating board to redefine these parameters and these definitions. I'm actually working on a task group, a work group, if you will, with TACC to redefine and otherwise be more inclusive with these definitions. So there, at some cases, you'll have to see that little note at the bottom of the slide. It'll indicate whether it's FTIC or college-wide data, and we probably. Dr. Christine, if we can put a little bit more emphasis on as we're going through, this is FTIC or this is college-wide. Because out of the 7 KPIs today, Regents, only 2 are FTIC related. The others are college-wide data, if I'm not mistaken. Dr. Wilson, that was the case.
There may be 3.
3, I'm sorry.
In goal 2, I believe we have 1 KPI.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So please understand that. Still very, very valuable information, but you'll see the totality once we get through and we start looking at transfer rates and continuing education. and all of these other sorts of things as we start telling our story, as Dr. Wilson so aptly put it and so perfectly put it at the beginning of this presentation. Thank you.
Well, I'm sorry,
I
Dr.
haven't-
Sherwood, yes. Dr. Sherwood.
Okay. Looking at our cohort, I am guessing, I don't know this for certain, that Blinn College, because of the nature of its mission and the students who go there, who are primarily transferring into A&M as their goal, that their numbers are partly driving the overall numbers for that large Texas cohort, and kind of wondered what that cohort would look like without Blinn.
Dr.
If we would be closer if they were removed from the cohort.
Dr. Sherwood.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Yes.
Go ahead, Dr. Escamilla.
Thank you. That's the outlier in this group. At one point, Central Texas was one as well, but because of some changes in the military, that flipped. But Blinn is much larger than we are, and much larger than the rest of its cohort members. And so, yes, as Dr. Wilson was saying earlier, we have very different attributes and locations and all of those sorts of things. That place, plus its residential abilities to have students, living in dorms and all that other sort of thing, and being right there, literally in the shadows of the Blinn campus, in the shadows of the big university and so forth, gives it very different attributes. So thank you for pointing that out. I think the coordinating board understands that. I think these cohorts will be realigned and re-established in coming years. Hopefully not too much further down the road, but they are very different than the rest of the cohort members.
Until that happens, I might suggest that, I know this complicates things again, but maybe add a second line in all of these that with the large Texas cohort minus Blinn.
Duly
That's
noted.
a good idea.
Duly noted.
My concern, and I certainly agree with you, Dr. Sherwood, about Blinn and the nature of their numbers and their students and the nature of the students that go there and what their ultimate educational goals are. What my big concern is around the full-time student. Because if we have 11, 12,000 credit enrolled students who are going to school part-time by their life choices, by their circumstances, whatever, again, is impacting their educational decisions, these numbers do not talk about 78% of our students. And so I appreciate that the coordinating board wants to see these numbers, but when you take such a small slice and you make institutional decisions based on 560 students, that is of great concern to me.
Yes.
And so that's why really diving into these KPIs is important, and we're certainly always going to answer the questions that the state or the federal government asks us. But I really want us to understand what this number is and how the nature of our students and the decisions they're making around the part-time versus full-time student impacts these numbers. So this is of great concern to me.
Yes, and the resolution for your concern, I would say our concern, is lies in our new ERP, because we're having to create these college-wide data sets ourselves, and that's why it was critical to convert and move into a new platform that had those capabilities and that we're able to build from the ground up, and that's literally what we're doing now. And so it will take time to do those kinds of things, and we continue to grapple with the capabilities that or the data within the capabilities that we have now, and we absolutely knew that putting these data sets together for this presentation, and especially on such focused types of data, such as graduation rates. But again, it is our ability within the state parameters to compare ourselves still. And I think the other part of this, and we talked about this in a statewide meeting a few weeks back, and that is that the state uses these data because they want to compare us to all higher ed students. And so when they get a cohort from all 50 community colleges and all however many universities, and they pull this particular strand, they're able to see and test rigor, quality, and overall likeness, if you will, of the 2-year and the 4-year institutions too. That being said, we do need to tell our story, and again, the majority of these data sets that we're going to have out here are going to be college-wide data. We are fortunate and are working on it. We are fortunate that we have the few KPIs identified that are still FTIC, but it is a major overhaul in the research office and through technology that we will resolve your concern.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Continue, please.
Thank you. Now we will discuss KPIs 3 and 4, time and semester credit hours to degree. These KPIs measure the average length of time in years and the average attempted semester credit hours to complete an associate degree. Unlike most of the indicators that we will discuss today, our goal is to decrease these numbers. In 2019, the college did meet its threshold for average time to degree, but did not meet the threshold for average semester credit hours to degree. Here is a visual representation of our average time to degree for the past 5 years. As you can see, our rates have remained fairly consistent. This is an indicator that has been looked at closely by the college's Guided Pathways Steering Committee, and is one of the reasons why the committee determined that we needed to implement guided pathways at the college. It is also a significant reason why advising was chosen as the topic of the college's Quality Enhancement Plan, which is a plan required by our regional accreditor, SAC-COC. We will talk more about this when we get to the strategies portion of the presentation. Here is a visual representation of our average semester credit hours to degree for the past 5 years. We have had a slight overall decrease in recent years, and we have set an ambitious target for 2024. Both KPIs 3 and 4 have been an area of focus for the Guided Pathways Steering Committee. We recognize that we have a significant opportunity to improve, and we have already put many efforts into place to address student needs related to these 2 indicators. Here you will see the details for KPIs 3 and 4 for Del Mar College, our large college peers, and all Texas colleges. Again, the rate of change here over this time period is what is important to notice. We are moving in the right direction by reducing these numbers. However, we do seek to reduce our numbers at a faster pace. I'll pause here for questions about KPIs 3 and 4.
I'll jump in. Regents, this is a particular metric that has history tied to it going back to 2012 and 13 when the coordinating board reduced our number of hours to a degree. It was called the 60-hour rule, whereby prior to 2012 and 13, we had degrees upwards of 72 hours and even higher than that in some certain cases. The coordinating board reduced the number of required hours for an associate degree to 60. And what I'm saying is, with that, is that the college had been very comprehensive, shall we say, with regard to offering hours to our students, and the degrees were stacked with healthy amounts of hours and so forth. We all have realized, and we all know that since then, it's been a slow change to efficiency for the sake of efficiency, to getting students out. Now, that being said, many of our students are over there earning multiple degrees and the like, and that really is an accumulation of the time that they stay here and stay with us. So that being said, this is a particular one where we are a standout in a way of that I would say is not what we're looking for. The idea is to shrink that time to completion, shrink those number of hours per degree, and we're having college-wide discussions. We've been having college-wide discussions leading up to this, and we're looking for. I can't wait to dive into the strategies part of this conversation, because that's where things will be very telling as to what the college is doing to reduce or to increase efficiency and reduce inefficiency.
Doctor, it looks like in 2015, we had 8 more hours than the Texas College average. And in 2019, it appears we're at 13 hours more than the average. So that looks like it's going the wrong direction compared to all Texas colleges.
Well, that's
Am I
what I'm
correct?
saying. This is an area of efficiency that we've been incorporating and bringing on new strategies. I agree with you. It's not the direction that we need to be going, and this is our opportunity. And the colleges, we were late adopters in some of these policies, especially with the efficiencies to the 60-hour rule and so forth. So other colleges had a head start on us by their own choice, I would say. I think this is more of an effect of being the late adopter to the 60-hour rule, because it wasn't just a everybody at once kind of thing. It was a timeline, and you had a deadline to adopt, and we came in at the tail end of that piece. So agreed, this is an opportunity for us, and we are focusing in on it and having conversations within the educational divisions to reduce that. The other thing too is we remain much more like, as I've studied the data, we're a commuter college, and we remain much more like Austin Community College in that regard, and where students are here earning degrees, jumping in and out, and stretching the time out that they're here and the like. Our data more reflects Austin Community College than Blinn College, and so there's whenever you start looking at the commuter college type of scenario, this is what you get. And again, these are the strategies that we're putting in place to reduce these numbers and gain more efficiencies.
Thank you. Great discussion. Next is KPI 5, full-time and part-time enrollment comparison for credit students. We are seeking to increase the percentage of our students who are enrolled on a full-time basis and decrease the percentage of students who are enrolled part-time. It is important to note that the average age of our credit students is 24 years old. Most of our students have significant responsibilities outside of the classroom, including employment and parenthood. Though it may not be possible for the majority of our students to maintain a full-time college schedule, we seek to provide the encouragement and opportunity for students to enroll in as many classes as they can. As you can see from the snapshot, we have met our thresholds. This indicator does not include dual credit students. Here is a visual representation of students' enrollment status over time. The percentage of full-time and part-time students has remained consistent. We seek to reduce the gap between these two trend lines. This slide uses statewide data to compare student enrollment status. This data does include dual credit students. What I would like to point out is the similarity between Del Mar College's data and the average of all Texas colleges. Our students' enrollment status is much more similar to the state average than it is to our large college peers. Almost 35% of students in the large college cohort are enrolled full-time, as compared to 22% of students at Del Mar College and 22% of students at all Texas colleges. This dissimilarity between Del Mar College and our peer group may account for some of the differences we have seen between our college and our peers when it comes to completion rates, time and semester hours to completion, etc. I will pause here for any questions about KPI 5.
I'll take that chance. Regents, full-time to part-time enrollment has been, again, it is the basis for is the base descriptor for our population. Our students are largely part-time. They're commuter, obviously. We're not a residential institution, and they commute in from all corners of our service area and beyond. Many of them from beyond. And as such, we know that to move as many students towards the full-time scenario or status is what we're trying to do, is what we've been trying to do. And we knew by doing that our numbers in many different areas and our outcomes would improve by the metrics that we're putting forth. There are colleges all throughout the country. And I've talked to friends, and I was on the phone with friends over the weekend from around the country who are perfectly fine with the commuter status. And there's a portion of our status that needs to remain as such. Not every student needs to be a full-time student or even can be a full-time student. And so we must maintain those flexibilities and keep the parameters there. That being said, the numbers are not where they can be. We're trying to find that equilibrium, if you will, and or balance in where the ratios are. We do believe that the more, and we're understanding that the more opportunities that we give our students to be full-time with the appropriate time and resources and so forth allotted for that, that the completions and graduations and all of those other kinds of metrics will improve. We do know that. And so it's a matter of setting strategies up, teasing out those students, if you will, pulling them out of the ranks for that full-time status with 8 weeks and other things, other strategies that we're going to talk about here in a little bit to set them up as such. Again, those part-time students, my good friend, I'm going to use his name, Mr. Crenshaw, over at, who's the principal at Flower Bluff High School, took 10 years to get through Del Mar College as a meat cutter. Okay, and he says that's the way I had to live to support my lifestyle and my family life and so forth. And it took him 10 years, part-time, and of course now he's one of the pillars in education here in the community. But that education was exactly what his life called for, and he had no. That was what he asked for. That's what he chose to do, and what his life required, as an example. Thank you.
This is Mary. I'm not suggesting this be part of the KPIs, but it seems like the opportunity for really impacting this might be with those students who are coming directly from high school. And so internally, looking at that cohort for this metric might be a place for real impact. Recognizing that people who are a little bit older, who have already have much more responsibilities and everything, and less opportunity to go full-time, that might be part of the strategies, but I know we'll get to that.
That's a very good point. Thank you, Regent Sherwood. Moving on to KPI 6, transfer to a 4-year institution. This indicator looks at the transfer rate of FTIC students. So again, this is just a subset, a cohort, not all of our students. And it looks at these students over a 6-year period. To get to our 2019 transfer rate, the state tracks the 2013 FTIC cohort. This cohort consisted of 1,334 students with both full-time and part-time enrollment statuses. In 2019, we did meet our threshold. It's important to note that in addition to the 12.4% of the cohort that transferred, an additional 15.4% completed a certificate or degree but did not transfer. The state calls these students non-transfer completers. Not all of our students will seek to transfer. In the fall 2019 semester, 45% of our credit students had declared a workforce program major, which are not intended for transfer. Even though these majors are not intended for transfer, these students are still included within this cohort for tracking purposes. Here is a visual representation of transfer rate trends. Over the past 5 years, our rate of transfer has decreased slightly, and we are aiming for a 17% transfer rate by 2024. Here are the transfer rate details for Del Mar College, our large college peers, and all Texas colleges. Again, our rate has decreased, which isn't what we want to see. Keep in mind, though, that this KPI tracks FTIC students, not the entire student body. We will look at the entire student body in the next slide. We definitely have an opportunity here for improvement, which is being addressed in our college's new Quality Enhancement Plan. Another way to understand transfer is to look at the number of all students that transfer each year. This slide includes our most recent data. Of the students enrolled in the 2016-2017 academic year, over 1,700 students transferred to a 4-year institution by the following fall. 216 students transferred to another community college, and 164 Del Mar College graduates re-enrolled at Del Mar College. Of the over 1,700 students who transferred, almost 1,500 of them were enrolled in transfer degrees at Del Mar College, and they transferred before graduating with us. This demonstrates that not every student seeks to earn a degree from Del Mar College, but instead chooses to start their college careers with us, and they transfer when they're ready. Our top transfer institutions are also included on this slide. I will pause here for any questions about KPI 6.
Doctor, does this include dual credit students?
That is a very good question. Yes, it does. It does. I believe it does. Actually, I would have to double check that. I didn't look at that in particular, but my guess is that it does.
Yep. So Regents, here in this situation, this is one of my favorite scenarios, because what we're talking about is an overlap of students who transfer who never intend to graduate, and with whatever amount of hours they take for their required lower division work to go to these universities. We're talking about a group of overlapping in 16. Hold on. In 2016 and 17, we completed 1,822 degrees and certificates. In the same year, there were 1,749 transfers to 4-year institutions. Now there's an overlap of about 200 of those. Out of those, like those 216 actually received degrees and certificates. That means more than 1,500 left without completing a degree or certificate. Okay, when you combine those two numbers for that particular year with those early leavers, if you will, that is a huge number. That is over 3,000 students who are completing their goals by transferring and or graduating with a degree and or graduating with a degree or certificate.
This is Mary. I have a question about how you account for, because we all know there's a lot of swirl, or where students are co-enrolled, and go back, and then they go back and forth. How do you deal with that in the data?
If you look at our most recent cohort, the 2016-2017, we look at a snapshot of students enrolled at Del Mar College, and then we look at the subsequent fall, and anyone who is no longer enrolled at Del Mar College, we track and see where they are. So we are considering the transfer, meaning they are no longer enrolled at Del Mar College.
Okay.
So again, Regents.
Dr. Wilson?
I'm sorry, oh, sorry, Regent Estrada.
Dr. Wilson? This is
Yes,
Regent
ma'am.
Estrada. I think Dr. Escamilla answered part of my question, and you may have addressed it a little bit with Dr. Sherwood, but what are we doing with those students that are so close to getting a degree from Del Mar? Like, I know of one student in particular that was only 3 hours away from getting her degree at Del Mar, but she transfers to A&M Corpus Christi. Do we get any credit for that student, or will she just be counted as a non-completer? I mean, we're looking at only one more class that she needed from Del Mar, and she says, well, I'm not going back to Del Mar because I'm going to go to A&M. And do we get any credit whatsoever for that student, or does A&M take the credit?
Regent Estrada, at this point, we do not get credit for those students.
Yep.
That's something that we're looking at within our student enrollment and also our instructional leadership to see how we can encourage students to complete with us, and also those that are so close, encourage them to take the classes that they need to graduate. But at this time, in the situation you're describing, if they leave us before completing a degree or certificate, they are not counted with us.
And Regent Estrada, unless those students do what's called a reverse transfer of credit, I was that student that left Del Mar College with 60 hours and didn't graduate for a very long time until I did a reverse transfer, actually in 2010. But still, I'm an example of exactly what you're talking about, and that happens a lot. Now the state is working, and we are working with the coordinating board with a strategy, what's called the reverse transfer project, to see if we could automatically identify those courses and reverse transfer those classes automatically. Of course, those students have rights, and they have to sign waivers and those sorts of things. But students can reverse transfer credit once they've completed the requisite coursework at their upper division university. So that they can do that. But exactly as Dr. Wilson said, under that scenario that you just said, when they leave with 60 hours, or if they leave with 57 hours, in this case, it would not be a completion or a graduation.
Thank you.
But again, the
This is
3,000.
Dr. Mary, I thought at one point at least that there was some sort of a project, at least between Del Mar and A&M Corpus Christi, where as students registered there, they were being asked to sign to allow that to happen, and then it was sort of a data being shared situation, as long as the students had given permission when they registered. So I'd be curious, to know what eventually, not right now, obviously, but to know what, if that's gone by the wayside or if that's still being pursued.
Duly noted. I know Dr. Silva has some information on that.
I would like to comment on Regent Bennett's question earlier. I will need to double check and see if dual credit students are included. That's an excellent question, and unfortunately I didn't check on this. This comes from our statistical profile, and I'm actually not sure if they're included in this group, so I apologize, and I'll have to double check on that.
When you get that
So
answer,
what-
Dr. Wilson, would you please have Dr. Villarreal or Dr. Escamilla inform the board of that answer? Thank you.
I will. Our final KPIs for Goal 1 are focused on dual credit success. These are KPIs that I personally am really excited about. These are new indicators that we have just started tracking. We are not required by the state to collect data on dual credit success, but I believe that this is a significant part of the Del Mar College story that we need to tell. We have always looked at dual credit enrollment data, and now we seek to focus on success. Our first step was to identify dual credit seniors for the most recent academic years. You can see this in the left columns. From there, we sought to determine how many of those seniors earned a credit degree or certificate by the time they completed high school. We also wanted to know how many seniors chose to enroll in Del Mar College after completing high school. Finally, we wanted to know how many more of these seniors earned a credit degree or certificate from Del Mar College within 1 year of completing high school. As you can see, these numbers are very positive. We do not yet have thresholds or targets for these indicators, but they will be developed in the near future. Some of the other analyses that we will be conducting are the number of dual credit seniors that complete core curriculum requirements by the time they graduate, and we also want to see how many of them transfer to another institution after they graduate from high school. Those indicators are forthcoming. I will pause here for questions.
Just to clarify, the number of students in the cohort include collegiate high school, branch academy, and then any dual credit, traditional dual credit, whether in person at the high school, in person here, online, hybrid, whatever it is, all dual credit students.
All dual credit students enrolled in credit coursework. We do have some students that are enrolled in continuing education coursework, and at this time those students are not included. That is an analysis that we will be doing in the future. We are really excited about these numbers. It shows the impact of dual credit on students' trajectory through higher ed. Any questions? Additional questions? Okay. This brings us, I'm sorry, did I hear something? Okay. This brings us to the strategies portion of the presentation for Goal 1. I will hand the floor over to Dr. John DeHalcom, who will be talking about the first set of strategies.
Yes, the college has developed a quality enhancement plan, or QEP. It's called GPS, Goals plus Planning equals Success. And also we've developed guided pathways that will help in achieving Goal 1 of the strategic plan, completion, creating pathways that guide students to achieve their educational goals. Now, as you recall, the QEP is a requirement of our regional accrediting body, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, or SACS. Del Mar College's QEP focus is to improve student success by enhancing current advising practices and providing a consistent student advising experience that is designed to support students in meeting their goals at Del Mar College and beyond. The QEP can empower our advisors, and we have 3 types of advisors: our staff advisors, faculty advisors, and we have specialty embedded advisors. So we can empower them with the updated knowledge and technology to support students to achieve their academic goals. The basic goals of the QEP include clarifying career goals, following consistent and effective advising practices, improving student engagement, strengthening transfer pathways, and utilizing innovative technology. Now, along with the QEP, we have our guided pathways that includes the 8 GPS map areas, as you can see. And those areas were developed, edited, and refined with the input of faculty and staff college-wide. The structure has served as a foundation for our QEP, which, as mentioned, is focused on improving student advising. Guided pathways will provide students a clear roadmap to on-time completion. The basic features of guided pathways are clarifying the path to student end goals, helping students choose and enter a pathway, help students stay on that path, and ensure that students are learning. So our guided pathways and our QEP go hand in hand in improving the processes of the college to meet the goal of achieving student success and completion. So next, we have Dr. Silva, who will speak about the next strategies.
Thank you, Dr. Halcomb. Next slide, please. One more before this one, please. It's on Project Senda. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. In this slide, we're going to discuss two completion strategies, Project Senda and the new ERP Anthology Campus Management. The Project Senda grant will play a major part in our completion strategy. As Dr. Halcomb mentioned, advising is a key component in reaching the completion goal. Currently, our advising model consists of embedded advisors, staff advisors, and faculty who provide advising services in addition to their teaching duties. Project Senda has designed a comprehensive advising training program with a goal to certify 140 faculty advisors in the life of the grants. The grant is going to increase the number of embedded advisors by 4. We currently have 8 embedded advisors that serve the different divisions. By the end of the grant, the college will have a total of 12. The embedded advisors complement the 5 liberal arts advisors and the over 300 faculty advisors that advise our students. The increase of advisors plus the purposeful training will result in better advising sessions where advisors will go through a scripted checklist with the students, which includes career advising, academic planning, and transfer options. This focused advising sessions are also being proposed to occur more frequently. Currently, students have to see an advisor up until they complete 24 credit hours. An ad hoc committee made up of faculty and staff are suggesting we increase those hours to 30, with an intent to require all students to see an advisor upon reaching 15, 30, and 45 hours. These touch points will assist students to keep them on track of their academic progress. Next, a new ERP, Anthology Campus Management, will help students and advisors stay on the right track. The new ERP will have a degree pathway tool which has a visual dashboard, which will keep track of the progress and suggest what classes for the students to take next. This tool will be a great benefit to both the students and to the advisors. Hand it back to Dr. Wilson.
Dr.
Thank
Silva.
you.
Dr.
Yes.
Silva, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am, Regent.
What does SENDA, S-E-N-D-A, stand for?
That's a good question. It's Students Engaged in Direct Advising. That is the acronym. And in Spanish, Senda also means pathways, which is, of course, connected to our guided pathways. Thank you for that
Students
question.
Engaged in Direct Advising. Okay,
Students
thank you.
Engaged in Direct Advising. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
The college has purchased a contract with EMSI to utilize the Career Coach software tool. This software includes a career assessment that allows prospective and current students to identify their career interests and strengths. The results of the assessment will be linked directly to the college's guided pathway structure and the college's online catalog. Career Coach also will provide students with local job market demand data and projected salary information for the careers that they're interested in. We believe that Career Coach will help students to make an informed decision regarding their educational career choices. Dr. Halcomb will now discuss transfer activities.
Yes, our faculty chairs and deans are continually working on transfer agreements with our neighboring institutions in order to have the students seamlessly transfer to the university without losing many credits or any at all, and also reducing that time to completion. We have our neighbor here, A&M Corpus Christi, who visits our college on a regular basis and can answer every week questions that our students have. Our faculty also work with the co-board through committee assignments, and we've had numerous faculty on field of study committees. And by working on field of study, we can lock in a sequence of courses that the universities are required to take. And we have programs such as engineering, field of study, music, field of study, and a whole host of them as well. Now, as Rita had mentioned, a SENDA objective is to increase our articulation or transfer agreements. And that strategy is incorporated into an advising checklist where students will be asked early in their college career if they plan to transfer, and encourages students to research the intended institution. And it's important that they do research the institution that they'd like to transfer to. So we have partnerships not only with A&M Corpus Christi, but also Texas A&M Kingsville. We have agreements with many other universities such as Lamar, Texas Tech El Paso, University of Phoenix, UT Medical Branch, UT Tyler, Western Governors University, Texas. Now, furthermore, to strengthen pathways to four-year colleges, the college has worked with nearly 200 program transfer plans, and those have been initiated, and we still need to continue to do work to complete those transfer plans. As you can see, transfer is critical to our students, and so we have to work very closely with our university partners to help them, our students, to transfer and complete a four-year degree. So our QEP, our guided pathways, the SENDA grant, a new ERP, career coach, and transfer initiatives are all important to work in unison that will lead to students' completion and success. I'd like to now hand the floor back over to Christina.
Dr.
Thank you,
Holcomb?
Dr. Holcomb and Dr. Silva. Thank you very much. We'll pause here for any questions about our strategies. Regent Estrada?
Yes. When is career coach introduced to the students? Is it as they're coming in as freshmen, or when do they get to know about career coach?
Regent Estrada, this is a software tool that we just entered into contract with. So currently it hasn't been offered yet. Our plan is to begin working with the vendor, EMSI, to get this set up within the next few months. Ultimately, the plan will be to have EMSI available to any current or prospective student on our website and on our new student webpage, but it'll also be incorporated in the advising checklist that Dr. Holcomb and Dr. Silva mentioned, so that students can use it very early on.
Thank you. The reason I was asking was because this is the first time I hear about career coach, but thank you for answering my question.
You're welcome. We're very excited about it, especially because we can link it directly to our college catalog and also provide students with local labor market information and wage information, which is very important when making career decisions. Are there any other questions about our Goal 1 strategies?
Dr. Wilson, before we move on to goal number 2, this might be a good time to take just a quick break for the Regents. So if we could come back at 10:20 a.m., please. That'd give us 6 minutes.
Thank you.
We've got 6 of us. I think we can go ahead and reconvene. I know Regent Averett will join us shortly. So Regents, just as a time check, we are on track to finish this presentation about 11:20, 11:30, and then we will go into our policy presentation for the last half hour of our workshop. So with that, Dr. Wilson, you may continue, please.
Thank you. We have now completed Goal 1. Goal 2 centers around 2 main aspects of student success: recruitment and persistence. It is the mission of Del Mar College to provide access to higher education to residents of the Coastal Bend. This access is best measured through the number of students that we recruit and retain over time. The goals of our students are as diverse as the students themselves. It is our role as a college to provide the necessary supports so that students can achieve their goals, whatever they may be. Apologies. Trying to get the next slide going. Goal 2 has 4 KPIs. We will again be telling our story through these indicators. Our first KPI is student enrollment within credit programs. Here we are looking at the fall credit headcount, including dual credit students. The headcount counts a student only once, regardless of the number of classes that they are enrolled in. In 2019, we did meet our threshold. Here's our 5-year trend line. We have experienced a 10.7% increase in enrollment headcount, which surpasses the increase of our large college peers at 4.3% and at the statewide average of 6.8%. Until recently, we had felt confident that we could meet our 2020 target. However, in light of the unprecedented circumstances due to the pandemic, it does not look like this target will be met. Dr. Escamilla, is there anything that you would like to add about this?
Lots of details around the impact of COVID. Again, the anomalies that keep coming out as a result of the pandemic will be, I don't think will be fully understood for at least months and even a few years to come. But that being said, we'll dive into deeper enrollment reports next month when we do our fall update on that particular item, and it'll be an in-depth conversation and regarding what we know now, or up to that point anyway, regarding the impact of COVID. That being said, credit enrollment, again, there's 2 sides to every story. There's the credit, and then there's the continuing education. I just want to remind everybody, 12,000, 11,000, 12,000 credit students. We have almost as many on the continuing education side at any given point. We touch many, many, many lives. Thank you, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you. In addition to looking at our headcount, it's very important to be familiar with our contact hours. Contact hours reflect the amount of time that a student spends in instructional activities as part of their enrolled coursework. Fall contact hours have increased by 7.8% since 2015. Spring contact hours have increased by 9.6% since 2016. As Dr. Escamilla mentioned, to view the full picture of student enrollment, we must also review enrollment in our continuing education programs. Thresholds and targets have been set for continuing education programs, corporate services, Texas Workforce Commission programs, and transportation training. All areas have met their thresholds and targets, with the exception of transportation training, which just missed meeting the threshold. Here are the 5-year enrollment details for continuing education programs. It is important to note the rate of change over the 5-year time period. All areas have seen increases, with the exception of the Texas Workforce Commission funding and grants. The exact rate of change is uncertain due to data that is currently unavailable. However, we do know that there has been a decline as the college no longer hosts the Adult Education and Literacy program. This visual illustrates the continuing education contact hour trends and color codes them by state reimbursable hours, Texas Workforce Commission funded hours, and non-reimbursable hours. The biggest increase occurred in the 2015-2016 academic year due to time-bound contracts led by corporate services. As you can see, the most recent year of data, 2018-2019, does not reflect the orange piece that we're used to seeing in prior years, as the college no longer hosts the adult education and literacy program. I will pause here for questions regarding enrollment.
Dr. Wilson, this is Regent Estrada. If I remember correctly, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
If I remember correctly, maybe 3 years ago, we talked about the Education Service Center taking over the adult education classes. Will we ever go back to teaching some of those classes at Del Mar?
I'll take that one.
That's a
Dr.
very
Wilson.
good question. I'll defer to Dr. Escamilla if he wants to comment.
So we continue, Regent Estrada, to teach a smaller portion, albeit GED, a portion of GED courses out there. The answer is yes. As the leadership at the Education Service Center has now turned over and other things going on out there, we expect that the next round of opportunity to get back to the GED program is what we more commonly refer to it as. We will get back to that program and seek that contract as aggressively as we possibly can. We believe we were by far outperforming anything that's being done right now, frankly, if I may be so blunt to say, and we look forward to getting back there. Just a little side note, just a reminder, GED is a net zero revenue dollar they're non-reimbursable, and we do not make money, but what we do know is we provide that valuable service to this region, that invaluable service, I would say, better than anybody in an 11 county service area. So we're looking forward to getting back to doing that, and we feel very strongly about that.
And I remember it being very successful when we had it. Thank you for your answer, Dr. Scamilla.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Wilson, I have a question about one of the numbers. Is this a good time?
It's a great time.
In the 2018-2019 bar, I see a number for the state reimbursable, I think makes sense, and one for the non-reimbursable. What is the 7.087? Am I reading that in the middle of the bar?
Yes, that is actually the TWC funded amount. That there is a small little bitty sliver of orange that can't be seen. So that's why it's not duplicate. You just can't see that orange anymore.
And it is 7.087, not, I mean.
No, that's 7,087.
Okay. Want to make sure okay. That makes sense then, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no other questions, I'll move on to KPI 2, students receiving Pell Grant awards annually. This is an important indicator to track as we want our students to apply for federal financial aid and maximize the funding that they're eligible for. In 2019, we met our threshold, and we have also met our target of increasing recipients by 3% each year. Here is our 5-year trend line. We have had an overall increase over the last 5 years, and we have set an ambitious target for ourselves for 2024. We anticipate that these numbers will continue to increase due to several strategies in place, which Dr. Silva will discuss a little later on. Additionally, House Bill 3 will require high school seniors to complete the FAFSA. This will begin in the 2021-2022 school year. We anticipate that this will have an impact on this KPI as well. We are able to compare ourselves to our peers if we look at our fall semester data. This table describes the percentage of the total credit student headcount that received Pell in the fall semesters indicated. At 30.9%, the rate at which Del Mar College students are receiving Pell Grants is comparable to that of our large college peers and the overall state average. I'll pause here for any questions about this KPI.
Is this information directly related to the 60 by 30 goal of helping students graduate with less debt? Because when you receive a Pell Grant, that's for a student who needs financial aid, that would be as opposed to a loan. So Pell Grants and scholarships and other things would keep them from going into debt, correct?
I would definitely say so. This isn't something, if you go to the coordinating board website and look for this particular data piece, they don't attribute that to part of their argument. They look specifically at the amount of debt. But I would agree with you, Regent Scott, that in support of that statewide plan and helping our students to maximize their eligibility, apply and utilize these funds, I agree that it supports the goal of reducing debt.
This is Libby. Just a quick question. I'm curious why you think all of these categories have decreased since 2014, just slightly.
It's very interesting. My thoughts initially is this is a percentage of total head count. So I wondered if just our student composition is changing. As we saw earlier, we have had an increase in the last 5 years of our head counts. But across the board, you're absolutely right. Even the state average has decreased. I see that Dr. Silva has turned on his camera, so that I want to see if you'd like to comment.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Wilson. I just wanted to share with the region here, when we're talking about the financial aid staff about it, and you're right, the 2018 dip is attributed to a good economy. And so that's what the financial aid experts were telling us, that with a good economy, hence students don't apply for financial aid.
I think another correlate. To that question is the number of dual credit students coming up. I think that as that number has grown significantly, especially throughout the state, I think it speaks to that trend. There is no financial aid, especially Pell, for dual credit students, and so as they drop our average age and increase in numbers, I think there's probably an impact there as well.
That's a very good point. Thank you. Now let's look at KPI 3, persistence rates. This indicator looks at the percentage of full-time FTICs enrolled in credit programs that continue to be enrolled at Del Mar College or another Texas public institution within the 1 and 2 year time frame. Again, this is just looking at a small subset of our population, not all students. When an indicator looks at full-time FTICs, it tracks approximately 500 students, a very small subset. We met our threshold for 1 year persistence rates and also our target for 2024. We did not meet our threshold for 2 year persistence rates. Here are our 5 year trends. We have had a slight increase in our 1 year persistence rates and have remained fairly consistent with our 2 year persistence rates. Again, this only looks at our full-time FTIC students. When we look at the details of our persistence rates for the past 5 years, it's important to focus on the rate of change. Our rate of change for the 1 year persistence rates is just above state average. We had a slight decrease in our 2 year persistence rates, which is something that we are seeking to address through our quality enhancement plan and other strategies. Again, as Dr. Escamilla mentioned, it's important to emphasize this. This is looking at only the full-time FTIC population, which consists of around 500 students each year. Now let's take a broader perspective and take a look at the persistence rates for all students enrolled in our fall semesters, not just full-time FTIC students. This table shows the percentage of all students enrolled in credit programs during the fall semester that were found to be enrolled at Del Mar College or another institution in Texas in the subsequent fall semester. As you can see, our fall-to-fall persistence rate is just above the state average. I'd like to pause here for any questions about KPI 3.
It's not a question, it's just a comment. I certainly think this is a very valuable number when it takes into consideration all of our students.
I agree. And when we compare ourselves to the state average, we've talked this morning about transfer. We've talked this morning about the fact that our students have different goals. So we may not retain all of them depending on their goals, but the fact that we are above the state average, I think, is quite positive.
And the fact that so many of our students go to school part-time, the fact that they are persisting fall to fall, year to year, to continue their part-time goals to ultimately, again, with our help and urging and guidance to meet their educational goals.
Yes. Thank you. This is it, Regents, the last KPI that we'll take a look at today, and then we'll move on to strategies. The last KPI that we will look at is the percentage of our student population that is classified as sophomores. During our strategic planning retreats, which took place about a year ago, we discussed the idea that we want to make more sophomores. In other words, we want to support our students in accumulating over 30 credit hours. A student is classified as a sophomore if they have earned over 30 credit hours, but not more than 72 credit hours. The data within this snapshot includes dual credit students. The college did not meet its threshold for 2019. To fully understand how we are doing with creating sophomores, we have to look at the big picture. The data that we looked at in the previous slide included dual credit students. It may be more appropriate to remove dual credit students from this calculation, as their course enrollment behaviors are different from that of our traditional population. This table excludes dual credit students. In addition to freshmen and sophomores, we also have the subgroups of unclassified and other. These are coordinating board definitions. Unclassified students are those that have earned 73 credit hours or more and have not yet earned an associate degree. Other students are those who have earned an associate degree or higher, a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and continue to be enrolled at Del Mar College. Unclassified and other students make up about 10% of our enrollment headcount. Here are our 5-year trend lines for freshman and sophomore students with dual credit excluded. We have had a slight decrease in the percentage of our students that are sophomores. We are seeking to improve this data point through our persistence strategies. We discussed earlier that each year, about 15,000 of our students transfer to a 4-year institution before earning a degree.
1,500.
They take the coursework that they need to get started, and then they transfer when they're ready. This can have an impact on the percentage of sophomores that we have. Additionally, some of our students may not seek to become sophomores if they are pursuing certificates that require less than 30 credit hours. I'd like to pause here for any questions about KPI 4.
So the 2.9% in the previous slide that had over 72 hours, 2.3%, 2.9% there in 2018. Our average hours to graduation is what, 93 hours?
I believe it was 93, 94. I'll have to double check, but in that range.
So they will mostly be in this 2.3% and 2.9%. Am I correct? They're no longer
That is an interesting correlation there, and I did wonder that myself. But I think that that's a safe estimate to make, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And in our hours to degree that you mentioned, Regent Bennett, that is hours to associate degree. So we have quite a few students as well that are pursuing credit degrees, certificates that may not be counted in that calculation.
And does this include they're not remedial courses, I'm not sure what the category is called, does this include those courses? So if somebody takes 27 hours of developmental courses, is that included in these calculations?
That's a very good question. I'm going to have to check on that because developmental coursework by definition is not considered credit. So I would have to double check and see if that's included in the credit hour calculations.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. This brings us to the end of the data portion of our presentation. We will now move on to the strategies. Dr. Silva will get us started with discussing recruitment and persistence strategies.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. For this slide, we're going to discuss 3 recruitment and persistence strategies. The new ERP, which is called Anthology Campus Management, Civitas, and our financial aid outreach program. It's going to start off with a new ERP, Anthology Campus Management. It's going to have a new customer relationship management component that will allow us to better manage our communication from prospective students to enrollment. Students will be able to complete an inquiry card virtually, which will be entered into a database that will follow a customer journey that will assist them at each step of the way. Next strategy is Civitas. Since we began Civitas back in 2017, over 800 nudge campaigns have been launched from various departments of the college. Departments are using this tool to reach out to students who were previously enrolled but not enrolled right now. Other departments are using it to encourage early application to graduation. And other departments are using it to remind of support services. The third strategy is our financial aid outreach program. In the 2019 budget, in alignment with our strategic plan, Del Mar College hired a financial aid outreach individual dedicated to offering workshops at high schools and on our campus to promote and assist students completing the FAFSA. The Financial Aid Office is also using current CARES funds to encourage students to complete the FAFSA to be eligible for these funds. Currently, 1,135 students have been awarded CARES funding for this fall 2020 semester. Additionally, as you heard before, House Bill 3, passed in 2019, requires all high school seniors during the 21-22 school year to complete the FAFSA. Our Financial Aid Office will be assisting local high schools to complete this legislation. Next slide, please. Thank you. 3 other recruitment and persistence strategies include our new marketing campaign, the conversion of Health and Fellows building to our Welcome Center, and the newly awarded TRIO grant. First, our new marketing campaign. Del Mar College recently acquired the services of Anderson Marketing Company to develop a comprehensive marketing plan. The campaign, Your Future, Your Way, began this summer. Goals for 2021 include to explore new emerging marketing opportunities to reach prospective students, to help integrate important college messaging pertaining to COVID, and to drive enrollment by positioning Del Mar College as a top choice for higher education in the region by highlighting the affordability and flexibility to learn your way. Next, the plan to convert Health and Fellows to the college's Welcome Center will assist recruiting and onboarding our new students. Enrollment services will be housed in Health and Fellows, providing a centralized location for students to acquire much needed services. And lastly, the newly awarded TRIO grant is going to help a special population of our students. With this grant, Del Mar College Student Support Service Program will identify 160 low-income, first-generation college students each year to participate in this program. Students chosen will receive tutoring, supplemental instruction, academic advising, financial aid assistance, career advising, and graduation planning. 1 director and 2 academic advisors will be funded with this grant. Del Mar College will be receiving over $261,000 annually for 5 years, for a total of $1.3 million. It is important to note, in the last 13 months, Del Mar College has been awarded over $4.1 million in federal grants in support of completion and persistence to reach these goals and to help our students. I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Halcomb for our next strategies.
Thank you. Additional recruitment and persistence strategies include new facilities, classroom technology, 8-week sessions, and Ad Astra. So let's look at new construction first. And I can tell you some of that new construction is really nice. The Workforce Development Center, the General Academic Music Building, Emerging Technology Expansion are all the most recent examples of new facilities that serve students with advanced technology. And most of all, pleasing learning environments. Newer facilities have been known to contribute to better attendance or improved creativity in newly designed active learning environments. Recruitment of students often is influenced by students seeing the updated facilities, especially in those areas in which they choose to major in. So new construction is very important for our students. 8-week sessions, we want to try to increase the number. We do offer 8-week now, but we want to increase the number. And remember, 8-week sessions include classes that cover the same amount of content as 16-week courses in a condensed time frame. Colleges in Texas that have converted mostly to 8-week sessions have increased persistence and completion to degree, transfer, and or career. 8-week semesters can reduce the number of courses the student takes at one time, increasing their focus. Students are more likely to have those life gets in the way events that disrupt a longer 16-week session. Schools have found that shorter terms tend to be more effective for students, and they accommodate the changing demands on the lives, especially of our part-timers. Students will be able to enter the workforce sooner. Not all programs, however, can fit into an 8-week model. And students through advising, and that's where advising comes in again, will need to figure out whether they need to take the regular 16-week session in their major area or the accelerated 8-week sessions. Next, Ad Astra. That's an interactive web-based scheduling and monitoring system. We have one source now for all classroom and special events. As we align pathways, advising, and registration, this will help us in understanding options available for our students. We can study the patterns in graduation and student pathway bottlenecks. We can get answers on how we are utilizing our space efficiently and the ability of our students to get the courses they need when they are available to take that course. In addition, this will provide clear pathways of sequencing of courses for students. Help with understanding the needs for the student will lead to an efficient and structured schedule that will decrease time to completion and ultimately graduation rates. Next slide, please.
Dr. Helcom?
Yes.
This is Regent Estrada. How
Yes.
much success have we had with 8-week term classes?
I have not seen data on our 8-week sessions and the success. Remember, right now, we're mixing the 8-week with 16-week. And we really have to advise students, are they an 8-week student or are they a 16-week student? So we really need to get to that place with advising. I do not have a data set for you, Regent Estrada.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, on this slide, I want to point out the QEP, Guided Pathways, and the Senda Grant provide a synergistic effect in achieving student success and meeting those strategic goals of 1 and 2. All three focus on advising in unison and will provide a purposeful and well thought out strategy for student success and completion. We have 3 kinds of advisors: our staff, faculty, and embedded, who will work together in the QEP, Pathways, and Senda Grant. As Dr. Silva discussed, the Senda Grant has a goal to certify 140 faculty advisors and increase our embedded advisors. The QEP will make advising consistent across the college, and guided pathways will get students on that right path and keep them on the right path to completion. We have a great opportunity with these 3 initiatives to give students the best of Del Mar College as they achieve their goals. And Christina, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Holcomb and Dr. Silva. Very good description of our strategies. I'd like to pause for any questions about our strategies or any lingering questions about our KPIs.
Okay. Regents, there's several things here. There are lots of exciting things that are going on that are supporting our students' experiences, rather. And I'm going to go out there kind of off script and bring in another strategy that we're going to be talking about in coming months. You know, when you're talking about recruitment, you know, we do hear from our students, our local students. We hear from the ones down the street. We hear from the ones across the county. We hear from the ones outside the counties and from other areas. Del Mar College in its early days and its formative years and so forth was a residential campus. Okay? It had housing that supported various programs, namely the arts, the music and the fine and performing arts. This college's history, going back after it was built in the 30s, into the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, had and still has one of the premier music programs anywhere. Our music faculty, year after year after year, go out and recruit students from all throughout Texas, and especially South Texas. And year after year after year, there are dozens of students, dozens and dozens, I would say. I think I'm probably being overly conservative on that number, or that estimate, that students can't come because there's no place for them to put their head down and reside as a full-time student. So there's a piece missing here in the recruitment aspect that we could advance on one day, I believe. And it's a part of the college's history. But when the college removed its capacity to provide residence halls or dorms, it disabled one of its abilities to support that very prominent and important piece of the curriculum. And not just the music program, but any other program for that matter. We are going to talk about that as a recruitment strategy, as requested by you all as a board, in coming months. And I think it'll be the November or December workshop coming up. I just want to tie that in for future conversations. But all of these strategies here are being put in place, and I think there'll be spin-offs of the things that we're doing now that will provide for a different experience for our students, and really begin to, I don't want to say change so much, but it will change the profile of our students, and certainly will change the experience for our students overall.
Dr. Scamilla, Regent Estrada here. I just wanted to attest to what you just said. I think Sandra Messbarger, one of our former regents, is a very good example of that. She came all the way from Mission or somewhere in the valley to Del Mar because we had housing and because we had such a fine music program. So she's a good example of what you're talking about.
She's the prime example, Regent Estrada, and I've spoken to dozens of them, dozens and dozens of students over the years who we've brought over for summer camps and summer exploration and weekend exploration and so forth. Or it really wasn't overnight, but they weren't camps per se, but they were day camps where students were brought in from all over. And I have talked to a few fortunate students who have been able to afford. I remember the one young clarinet player that I spoke to from Laredo whose parents could afford to bring him over, but he told me, he goes, all my friends back in Laredo want to come because this is the best program, but they can't afford it. They don't have a place to stay. There's no, and to add to that, the complexity of all that, there's not enough adjacent housing in the area to support that as well. So there's a piece missing here, and I hope we can address it completely, and I look forward to that opportunity.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? If not, that brings us to our conclusion. Let me get this queued up. There we go. Thank you for your attention and for your great questions this morning. My apologies, it seems like we have lost the presentation. Jessica, are you available to help with that? Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. The college has an operational plan which was included in the workshop packet today. It is a living document. It allows us to be responsive to changing conditions. Based on the results of our first year of activity and also the changing circumstances due to COVID-19, the operational plan will be updated with prioritized strategies. The updated plan will be completed before the end of the fall semester. Next slide, please. Here is a visual representation of our planning process. It is an ongoing circle of planning and improvement. The current strategic plan is in effect through August 2024. It will be formally evaluated annually. Next slide, please. Today, we covered goals 1 and 2 of the strategic plan. The remaining goals will be covered in upcoming board workshops and meetings. Next slide, please. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for your time today. The data and the strategy shared today help us to better understand and to better tell the Del Mar College story. It truly is an exciting time to be at Del Mar College, with many significant activities taking place to support our students on their educational journeys. We appreciate the support of the Board of Regents and of our community as we seek to help our students meet their goals. Thank you.
Regents, I want to thank Dr. Wilson and Dr. Silva and Dr. Halcomb and others for participating and putting together this presentation. I think it's important to note that it took us almost 2 hours to go through 2 of the goals. And so we made the decision to break this into 3 workshops, as Dr. Wilson just alluded to. Coming up then in the spring, we'll do the next 4 goals over 2 sessions as well. Knowing that data points and the discussion around the KPIs and the strategies for implementation can get us bogged down very quickly. But I don't want you to hesitate to ask a question of Dr. Escamilla or send a question through Dr. Villarreal if you want some additional information now on the KPIs as well as the implementation strategies. As Dr. Wilson said, they're going to update the operational plan and get that to us before the end of the year. But all of the KPIs are listed in that operational plan, and so wanted you to be aware that you can ask for additional information. We just didn't want to bog down with all 6 goals in this first session, hoping to provide you a little bit of a break to absorb one set of data or a couple sets of data before we move on to the next. And we'll talk about this in the regular session starting at 1 o'clock today, but we will have full discussions on the residential housing issue and what staff has been able to research and investigate regarding that, and as well as the strategic enrollment and marketing plan. So those are 2 really robust workshops that will be coming up as well before the end of the year. So with that, I see Ms. Hutchison, you have your mic open.
Carol, compliment and a question. I found this very, very helpful. I like to be able to see the graphs, the trends, and then to address it with, here's some thoughts about how we're moving forward with strategy. But with that in mind, is there a reason we're not hearing more goals until, did I see March? Is that?
It was a result of just kind of the planning calendar and looking at what we have to do in October, the workshops we have scheduled in November and December. The plan right now is to not have a January meeting. That January meeting usually falls very quickly after staff comes back from the winter break. And I don't know about you, but I would really like for them to have a winter break and to not have to work during their winter break this year, since spring break got canceled for most of our faculty and staff. So I was working on a planning calendar in which they could have, we would not have a January meeting. So it was just due to calendar timing. If the board would like to bring it back sooner, we certainly can adjust that workshop calendar if you all would like to hear some of those.
I just found it so helpful. I'm just expressing my I'm anxious to get to the next one. So whenever we can get to it, but I understand it's not the only thing on our plate.
Okay, well, we'll take that feedback and look and see if we can adjust the workshop calendar to bring you more of this substance. This is, as you're right, this is really, really good information, and it helps us all to better understand and articulate what is happening with the strategic plan. So thank you for that feedback. Other questions or comments? Again, thank you, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Escamilla, for all of your work. We are now going to move into item number 2. We're going to go straight into our next item. And that way, if we have a little bit of a longer lunch break, I don't think anybody would argue with that. As the board worked on our goals and action plans for the year at our May board workshop, we had, and Ms. McDonald is going to cover all this, we've had this policy review project for about a year and a half now. And so this is really kicking off this FY21 project. And so we will have this workshop, and then we'll have a follow-up workshop with an outside facilitator in October to really address it. So Ms. McDonald is going to do a little bit of reminder of where we came from to get to this point, and then help us prepare for that October workshop. Dr. Escamilla, I don't know if you have any other introductory remarks.
No, it's just that this is long coming, and this is really it's a little bit different scenario here with this policy project workshop. Ms. McDonald and I are here really to facilitate the board's pleasure with moving ahead and understanding its policies and the administrative procedures and so forth here at the college. So again, we are here to facilitate whatever vision the board has. This is one of those areas where the boards, this is kind of that direct board responsibility, and as such, I just would give it to Ms. McDonald and yourself, Madam Chair, to kick us off for discussion.
Thank you, Chair Scott and Dr. Escamilla. As mentioned, we're going to start today with our policy project workshop. And assisting me today is Jessica Alaniz, our risk manager. Beginning this fiscal year, she is taking a more active role in policy and policy administration. So she will be helping today to make sure we capture all of your valuable input. And as we move forward a little bit further into the presentation and get to our discussion section. Next slide, please. So our focus today is going to be in a few different areas. So we are going to review our project timeline and our next steps. And then we're going to move into what I'm calling our foundation and guide work for our October workshop. So keep these items in mind as we move forward into the presentation. Is what are our goals? What's the final result of the overall project? What are the outcomes, the results? What change do you expect when this project is completed? And then where is it anticipated that our internal audit and advisory assistance that we will be obtaining from Weaver, who will be the facilitator for the October workshop, how can they help achieve our goals and our outcomes? So like I said, as we move forward, let's keep those items in mind. Next slide. So in review, in October, staff brought a draft board policy, it was B3.16, 6 that was presented to the board. And that is what I particularly call our policy on policy. But that has been in draft form, and it remains in draft form. And that will be something that will be further reviewed and discussed in the October workshop that will be conducted by Weaver next month. In November of 2019, the policy project review and timeline was presented to the Board of Regents at the November 12th meeting. And here were the following outcomes. That particular policy, the B3.16, for it to remain as a working document, and that administration is to schedule and conduct a review of the manual policies and procedures to include, and this is not an all-inclusive, but mainly include policies in place to make sure that we comply with federal, state, and accrediting bodies. We're also going to be looking at the manual structure, policy formatting and placement, and have a formal schedule for board policy review. Next slide, please. So from January of 2020 through August of 2020, these are some items that have taken place. So you know that we have been doing some work in preparation for what I'm calling the main policy project. So we have done some preparation work. Administration to assign primary policy owners to all the B policies. That has been completed, and what that entails is that all policies, my role is to manage and facilitate the policy work as a whole, but I'm not the policy owner for every B policy. So for example, we had a policy that was brought to you last month by the CFO because it had to do with the reserve funds. That policy owners would be the CFO. So that's just an example of what I mean by assigning a primary policy owner. Administration to determine best practice to conduct review and engage external expertise as needed. So that has been completed, and what that preparatory work included was we engaged Weaver to come in and help facilitate the workshop next month, but also to provide audit and advisory on the project as a whole. So we conducted policy review for compliance with federal, state, and accrediting bodies. That's one thing they will be assisting with. Assist with board policy priorities. Assess and advise policy manual structure, formatting, placement. Advise us on some best practices. And also assist with the creation of a formal schedule for board policy review. Next slide, please. And also in January through August, we also had staff completed some work. We conducted a review of the policies for alignment with operations, chapter placement, and miscellaneous observations for project review. And we also conducted some research and reviewed other policy manuals of other Texas community colleges for what does their structure look like, their format, the ease of use for the end user. So those are some things as we move forward. Our focus primarily today is going to be board outcomes, board goals, but also since this is a comprehensive overview of the entire policy manual, there will be some things that administration also wants to make sure, now that we're doing this full project, that we want to make sure is also part of this very important work that's completed. Next slide. So here's a summary of some completed B policy work from September of 17 through August of 2020. Administration has presented over 36 B policies for board approval or adoption. This does not include revisions to personnel titles that in 2019 the board approved as a blanket project, which that particular project touched upon numerous B section policies, which we went in and put a designation to a title so it'd be consistent across all policies. So that particular count did not include that body of work that was conducted last year. And just so that we're all on the same page, because I know sometimes using a different name, a different definition. So for everyone to understand, the B sections of our policies are adopted and revised or approved by the Board of Regents. So that's why they all start with the B lettering. So those are things that come to the board. It's something that could be asked by the board, required by the board. It could be an accrediting body that says the board has to adopt a policy. It could be state or federal regulations that say the board has to actually adopt the policy. So those are the B policy sections. The A sections are administrative procedures and processes. developed by administration to implement board policy. So the A sections aren't policy, the B sections are policy. The A sections are those processes and procedures, or part of the operational part of the college to implement and take what the board has put in policy, and then administration takes that and puts it into a procedure or a process. So do we have any questions about that portion of the project? Okay, just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page with that. Thank you. Next slide. So here's our policy project timeline. So officially, I'm calling today our policy project begins. We did a lot of preparation work, so officially the project is beginning. So today we're conducting the board policy workshop, and we're going to use this, the board action plan that the board developed in their May of 2020 board retreat as a guide. We're also going to discuss, brainstorm, and develop anticipated goals and outcomes for the overall project. And also I want you to think of it in two parts. One is goals and outcomes for the overall project, of, the board expectations for that, but also the October policy workshop facilitated by Weaver. So we'll be looking at that in two pieces. What are your anticipated goals and outcomes of the October workshop that will be facilitated by Weaver, but also the overall policy project as a whole? What are your anticipated or expected goals and outcomes for that? Next slide. So our next steps will be in October of 2020, Weaver will conduct a board policy workshop, workshop number 2, and using the goals and outcomes from this workshop today, they will develop the workshop for October. And then also on that particular workshop in October, they will continue the review of the draft policy B3.16. Again, I would kind of refer to that unofficially as the policy on policy. Next slide. Next steps also will be a completion date will be determined. It's going to be determined in a couple different phases. There's going to be specific body of works that Weaver will be providing to us through audit and advisory. So they will, after the workshop, determine what is their completion date that they can have that body of work completed. And also by the Board of Regents. What is your, when will the board consider this project completed? So we'll work through those things as we move forward and determine those next steps. But those are going to be determined. Now, right now, Weaver's conducting an information gathering and analysis over Denver College policies and research and preparation for the October meeting, the October workshop. They have that information. They've been working on it. Also, for the October workshop, the established priorities, goals, and outcomes. They'll be using today what we develop as that, and then after the October workshop, they'll use those redefined priorities, goals, and outcomes to put a timeline or a completion date to the project. We may need to perform additional activities based on the outcomes of the October workshop. That doesn't necessarily mean they'll need another workshop. That's not talked about right now, but they could ask staff or for some additional work or some additional research or some additional input. So we'll see how that goes after the October workshop. And then they will also be assisting with the creation of a formal schedule for policy review. I think that we went over that last October when we presented the B3.16 policy. It did have a sample of a schedule at the end of that particular draft policy, to where it laid out the different chapters of our manual, and then it gave it a timeline, like, do certain items need to be reviewed every year, or is it every 2 years? Some of ours are laid out in policy. I know our investment policy is every year it's to be reviewed. So those kind of things have to be in consideration when we put the schedule together, but they'll help us create that formal schedule. And the formal schedule means it doesn't mean that every policy will come to the board, but it will be reviewed, and it may be the policy comes to the board as in there are no recommendations for changes. So that's how we'll put together that formal schedule. Next slide. So our agenda for today, it's in two parts. Are going to be our discussion. We're going to review the board action plan as it relates to policy. So we're not going to review your entire action plan from the board retreat in May, where we picked out the sections that we felt related to policy. And we'll also be discussing and define the desired goals and outcomes for the overall policy project and specifically the October workshop facilitated by Weaver. Next slide. Okay, so this is the first section which we're going to get into much more detail, and I really want to make sure this is interactive. I know it's a little challenging, but we're going to all do the best that we can. So this is when we're going to discuss and have some interaction and discussion, and we really need to, like I said, Jessica's helping us capture your input for the different items. So using the board action plan from the May 2020 board retreat, as it's related to policy, we're going to use that as a source to begin the discussion. So items can be added or deleted or revised based on your input. So the first thing is, I know that came off of the action plan, was review bylaws and board policies. So the first item was where to go with ethical concerns. This particular item is a very broad and global direction that we want to move in. We're not going to be addressing any specific issue or fact scenario that may need to be addressed separately with general counsel or an executive session. So as we talk about where to go for ethical concerns, like I said, we're going to keep it in a broad, maybe a process piece, because if you do look at, I pulled it up here earlier, in chapter 2, B2.1.2, it's not in your information, but it's the actual policy manual. You do address ethics for the board. So there are many items that are laid out in board policy already that addresses ethical standards. It's actually statement of ethics. That's what the policy is called. And again, it's B2.1.2. So you do have standards that are laid out. But so I'm looking for input as in, what are you looking for, a process? Are you looking for a person or place to go to? So Chair, I'm going to open that up if you'd like to help me start off with,
sure.
Maybe what was the...
As I recall, and I'm going to look to the Regents to help clarify, I think it was, if there is a question, who is the point person? And so I think it was just clarifying, do we go to general counsel? Do you go to the board chair? Where do you go? Is it the college president? Where does a regent go to for the initial discussion about an ethics concern? And so I don't know if Regent Averett or Regent Bennett or anyone else recalls that discussion, but as I recall, that was what the clarification was.
Okay,
hang on a second, Tammy.
A little bit of input. Looking through the actual policy manual, what you just mentioned, Chair Scott, that is not addressed in your current policy as where to go. You do lay out the statement of ethics, but you're correct. It does not lay out those particular items on a point person or who or where to go to. So,
this is Regent Averett. I agree that I believe that was one of our questions around that discussion. And I just don't want it to get lost, so that I think that there was some discussion in that workshop about just an overall review of the ethics policy as well. That may not be appropriate for this discussion specifically, but that it was broader than just the question of where do you take those concerns.
Okay, so a review of the overall policy, which I just mentioned, which is the statement of ethics under the board bylaws section, which is B2.1.2. So we'll capture that information. And then also, since, like I said, I did read through it, it does not address, as Chair Scott mentioned, it does not address like a point person or where to go. Then we're going to add a section in our notes that you do want maybe that added to the policy.
Yes, let's see a draft of what that would look like. And when I say this work, I'm assuming that Weaver or our internal staff will do a kind of best practices, what do other college policies look like, and come back either with a detailed recommendation or options for us to consider. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. The statement about a regular review of our ethics policy, that is our annual ethics update that our general counsel typically provides to us. I know it was abbreviated this spring, but that typically occurs in the February-March timeframe as per our annual calendar. And again, I know it was abbreviated this spring due to COVID and our abbreviated meeting schedules that happened this spring. But is that actually laid out in policy, Ms. McDonald, that ethics review happen annually?
No, ma'am. Like I said, I reviewed through the board section of the actual board policies or bylaws. It just has the statement and that it will be reviewed, but there is not a particular timeline. I think that is your practice, but it is not stated.
Yeah, it falls under the board calendaring,
Okay.
which is separate from all other documents. So it's like the president's evaluation, that sort of thing. It states that it shall be done, and the only timeline that we have associated with that is a separate document.
Okay. Any other questions or comments related to the revisions around the ethics policy? Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll move to the next section. So this, I did need a little bit more input. It was a note made from the board retreat on crisis policies, review for any needed changes. So one of my questions is there anyone specific you were talking about? Is this in general, or is this something that the board wants to understand what is the board role when it has to do with a crisis? Because typically, the majority of our crisis information is under our operational policies, so there's really no board policy on crisis. A lot of those particular things are under the responsibilities of the president. So just provide me with some input, or what was the meaning behind the crisis policy that was on your board retreat information.
I'll start and then would ask Regents to weigh in their understanding as well. Because of the timing in which this discussion occurred this past May, I think there was a wanting to understand the authority of the president in a crisis situation. It was not a criticism, it was a wanting to understand. And are there policy considerations that we, in light of hurricanes or pandemics or potential campus-based emergency situations, are there crisis policies that the board needs to understand, and or are there changes that need to be made to make sure that the college is operational and functional, and that the college president, CEO can do his or her job in a crisis situation? So it was not with anything specific in mind. It was just, do we need to review our policies related to crisis operations?
Okay, does anyone else have any input with following Chair Scott's comments? I think, Chair, part of that was addressed, and I know that will be covered in the October workshop. We did have a portion of the draft policy on policy, which is the B316, that will be reviewed and discussed further in the October workshop. There was a section that did speak to that, what you're speaking of, what is the president's authority in a time of crisis, and I think that we did look at that last year, and it was based off of some information I think we had previously captured from the board after Harvey, because we did understand that, like you mentioned, the board has to operate and function in time of crisis. They will not always be able to meet and get a quorum in the middle of a crisis at certain times, and the president CEO still has to make sure that the college is taken care of and operating and functioning. So some of that draft language is in that policy that will come back to the board next month, but I will go ahead and take a look at it again with the assistance from Weaver to make sure that we are covering and addressing your general concerns about the operational needs of the college and how do we operate and what is the structure and function in time of crisis.
This is Mary. I think part of this too goes into that structure idea of how we structure how the policies are laid out and everything. So this may come later, but maybe this is something that goes into that risk management section how you manage during a crisis, to me, would be a risk management issue.
Yes, ma'am.
Perhaps.
Okay. And we will get into the next part. We will get into more of that conversation and more ideas on Regent Sherwood, like you mentioned, on the formatting and the structure. So I know that's an important piece, and we will be discussing that further in our next section. So thank you for bringing that up. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next item. It's board email, digital policy, records retention, security, Texas Public Information Act. I know that's a very broad topic. We can take that in pieces. I will make a reference to, we do have current policy under records management. It's B3.19, and that speaks to the college's records management process, or the system, or just basically the state statutes that we abide by for records retention. We go by the regulations and the standards by the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. It's called TSLAC. And we do have a policy for records retention. That's the schedule that we follow. It's the state schedule. So we follow that for records retention. It tells us there's multiple categories in that particular schedule. So it depends on what type of information it is, and that schedule tells us how long we retain that before it is acceptable and allowable for us to basically get rid of those certain amount of records, because we can't keep everything forever. There's not enough paper as we're moving into the cloud-based too. I don't know if there's enough cloud space to keep all the records that we have, but there are some things that we are required to keep for its life. But there are some things that we may only be required to keep for 1 year or 2 years. So that's a very extensive schedule. If there's any specific or particular questions on retention of any specific item, as Chair Scott has mentioned before, you can always address those through the college, through Dr. Escamilla, and then he can get that to the correct person. We are required to name a records retention or records management officer, and actually Jessica Alaniz serves as she's the primary responsibility of records retention is under my purview, but Jessica is our designated officer. She is designated to the state that she is our records retention officer. So we do handle those pieces of records retention.
So this did not really have to do with the college's record retention overall. It was related to Regents and our communication with each other, with constituents on behalf of the college, what devices we use, what security is available on those devices, and those kinds of things. So are we going to require that all Regents use a delmar.edu email address for security and records retention and Texas Public Information Act purposes? Is that going to be encouraged but not required? And if we require it, are we going to provide devices, and what is the security around those devices then as well? So it was all about the Board of Regents and our communication, interaction, and the devices that we use around security issues.
Okay, so that will come into several different areas, and I know that's one thing we can put on the list for what is best practice, but what is required by law. So that can be covered in the October workshop, and as we move forward, it could be an added policy to the board section. It could also be our added process. So that information, we've captured your input. So that information is going to be in different areas. It's going to be, like you said, what is required. Is it required to use the email? And then you're talking about security, which I know that's a separate topic that will be addressed in other areas and other presentations, as far as security of that information. And then also, is the information that you have, is it the sole source of the information? Do you have to retain it if it's not the sole source? If the college actually is the one who has the original document or original information, then the college is responsible for retaining it. So we will make note of all the different points that you just made and make sure that we do cover that. for the workshop in October, and then also we'll ask for assistance from the audit and advisory from Weaver on what's required, what's best practice, but also, as we move forward with this project as a whole, these are also some things that administration will be involved in. Like I said, this is a project that we all have skin in the game, basically, from the viewpoint from the board, but also the processes and procedures that administration has in place, and also the total oversight of the policy, but also as we get into the other sections of how does it look, and also how does the end user feel about their experience with our policy work. So those things we have taken note of, and those will be addressed in separate pieces. Maybe not all of it will be specifically addressed by Weaver. A lot of it could be to give us, like you said, some best practices, but there could be other parties involved. We could have our general counsel involved, and of course, Dr. Escamilla. So we will all have a very good working team to answer all of your questions and make sure we cover all of these important issues that you'd like to cover.
Ms. McDonald, this is Libby. I believe we may have also discussed at the time the Regents and any policies around social media. I think that came up. Honestly, it's a little difficult to remember almost 4 months later exactly what all went into our concerns about some of these, but I think that there was at least a short discussion about best practices around social media and what's appropriate for Regents.
Okay, thank you for that input. So we will make sure we have that on our list to also
Libby,
additional information.
Libby, with your permission, I'd like to expand that to say external communications, because it's not just social media. It would be any sort of presentation, speaking, again, to groups, video. There's all kinds of ways that could come out. And so I think just external communications and making sure that the board agrees on what its processes and policies are going to be in terms of board members speaking about college business.
Okay, that's noted. Any other comments on this particular item? Okay, thank you. We'll move to the board committees. I know this was one of the items. If you could provide some input on board committees, I know it's a very broad topic, but I don't know if you wanted to enlighten me or give me some input on board committees, that statement.
Sure, we've had discussions, and there's I think a misperception out there about the board committees and the fact that the board has chosen in the past, 10 years, I think, maybe longer, to not divide into committees, but to do everything as committee as a whole. So I'd actually like the board to consider just revising the bylaws as it relates to committees, having either no committees in the bylaws, but make a revision, something along the lines of every 2 years as the board reorganizes itself, it may establish board committees as necessary. Or if the board chooses, do we want to name only 1 or 2 possible standing committees? But again, every biennium, as the board reorganizes itself, it makes a resolution as to what the committee structure is going to be for that biennium. I think there needs to be a more formal way that the board agrees to what its committee structure is going to be. And if we're not going to use the litany of committees that are currently in our bylaws, let's delete them and give the board the flexibility it needs to reorganize itself every couple of years. So I'd like to get others' feedback, or we can hold that for the October meeting, but that was my general thoughts around the board committees as a starting point.
Okay, well, that's very good information, because like I said, since we're using the workshop today to use as our guide and foundation for the October workshop, that's very important input so that we can make sure that that's looked at, it can be part of the project, it can be addressed, and also it's something that our external assistants from Weaver, our outside facilitator, can also be something that they bring you an advisory piece on and best practices. So any other comments on board committees? Okay, and what we did is we left a bullet point or an item as other. Were there other policy-related concerns or items that the board wanted to bring up to make sure that we look at as we move forward with this policy project, the workshop in October, as we move forward just as a project in general? Is there anything fall under other that we have not spoken about today?
This was not on the discussion from our May workshop, but as I ran through my notes in the last couple of weeks, and I apologize, Regents, I did have an advance viewing of this presentation, so I had a chance to go back and do a little bit of research. I'm thinking the process by which board members ask for information outside of the board meeting. We certainly have an opportunity to ask for clarification and as a group ask for information when we're meeting together as a board. But when board members ask for information outside of the board meeting, does there need to be a policy or procedure for that that's agreed upon by the board as a whole? And when that information is requested, should the question and the answer go to all board members, et cetera? So if there is some best practices around how board members request additional information outside of a board meeting, I think that might be something to consider, and that has come up either in a workshop note or somewhere in the past for me. I don't know if anybody else has those kinds of notes. The beauty of this process is this is not your only opportunity to add things to the agenda between now and October. If there are other items that you would like us to consider, feel free to, again, email me directly. I think I asked you all for that last month, or just bring them up at the October workshop when we had the October workshop.
Okay, so other is basically, is there a best practice, or does the board need a policy on the process for asking for or requesting information outside of the information that's presented as a board meeting? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Any other items you would like to put under other that we have not spoken about to this point? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask just to make sure that in this particular area that we've captured all of your input and that we're on the right track. I'm taking notes, and of course we can always go back and look at this review, but I'm going to ask Jessica Alanis to give us a really quick summary or recap of what we just talked about. Jessica?
Thank you, Tammy. So under ethical concerns, we have the question or the issue of who is the contact person for when there is a question regarding ethical concerns, and also the timeline or the schedule for overall review of the ethics policy. Currently, that's not stated in the policy at the moment. We also have under crisis policies, the understanding the authority of the president in crisis situations in regards to structure and function to continue operations of the college in times of crisis, for example, hurricanes or any kind of other disasters. We have under board email and digital policies. We have in regards to any policies or concerns related to Regents communications and interactions, external communications as well, in device usage, security on devices, whether Regents will need more emails, more devices, and the security for all of those pieces of equipment, and what is the required best practice and in regards to any type of regulations that need to be followed, and we'll seek assistance from Weaver on that. Also, in regards to external communications, any policies around social media usage or communications for Regents and what is appropriate. Under board committees, we have any particular language that might need to be clarified in the current board bylaws that might give flexibility to when the board can utilize or call on those board committees. And under other, the best practices for which board members can use to seek additional information outside of board meetings, and whether those questions and answers should be forwarded to all board members. And that's what I have.
Okay. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, with that recap, what we'll do is we'll move into our last section for our workshop agenda. So next slide, please. Okay, so based on our discussion and input, we're going to define our desired goals and outcomes for the overall policy project and also specifically for the October workshop. So again, what are the goals? What is the final result that the board is anticipating? What are the outcomes? What change do you as a board expect? What is the final outcome? Then where is it anticipated that the internal audit advisory assistance from Weaver can help us achieve these goals and these outcomes? So if we're looking at October workshop, what goal, what result, and then what outcome, what change do you expect to come from this workshop that Weaver will facilitate next month as it relates to all the information that we just discussed based off of your board action plan related to policy? And this specifically is going to be what the board goals and outcomes are. What is your expectations? There are going to be some others that are going to be developed by administration, because as we talked about, I know that Regent Sherwood mentioned earlier, there's a broader scope to this, a formatting structure. So many of us will have some additional goals and outcomes for that. But this is going to be specifically what are the board goals and outcomes, the result and the expected change. So like I said, we can define it into, when you're, for the sake of time, if you want to say, well, for October, this is what goal or outcome I would like to see. And then the overall project, this is the goal and outcome I would like to see.
So for October, is it realistic to expect some drafts already in progress on not just some of the items from today, but some of the overall items, so that the board could have first discussion at, again, not everything, but a first discussion on some of these board items? And then I would like to make sure that we are moving through this process fairly quickly. We don't want it to extend for months and months. So understanding the timetable by which things are going to come back to the board related to what we're interested in today. And then thirdly, what is the overall policy review schedule going to be? And that's that draft we have in place, but are there changes to that? And what is the overall policy review policy going to entail? Those are a couple things from kind of off the top of my head.
Okay, so any other questions?
Yeah, this is Mary. As I kind of look at how our policies are structured now, kind of maybe one of the first things we need to do with this October workshop is have some come out of that with some sense of, because we're just accepting that we have B policies and A policies, and what is actually the content of those, and how for the B policies, at what level do they need to be? For the A policies, is it policy, and then there's the procedure that enacts it, and how detailed do those need to be? Or there's some of those things that are should be in an operational manual versus a procedure statement. Things like that are occurring to me, that kind of sets the tone for the whole direction. Kind of my thoughts about that.
Yes, ma'am, and that has been, I did give a little bit of insight as far as administratively, and we'll continue discussion. I will continue discussion with Dr. Escamilla and the executive team and the college as a whole, is I do understand, that's why it was on there at the beginning of the project list, is to look at the formatting and the structure. I do understand the need to readdress and to reevaluate, but also have the outside facilitator come in and give us a best practice advisory. Is it a best practice to have some of those pieces, as you mentioned, in there in that much detail, or does it just need to refer over to some type of operational manual? So yes, ma'am, that has been put on the list to make sure we look at. And also one of the things administratively is at the end of this project, the end user having a much more better experience for the end user when they are looking up or going through policy. So yes, ma'am, that's on the list.
Tammy, Dr.
Thank
Holda,
you.
Dr. Holda had an example of a grid or a matrix of different decision points and whether it was under board policy, board decision, president, CEO. I don't know if Dr. Villarreal would have access to that from our May workshop, and I don't know if something like that would be helpful or not as a tool at the end of the day, whenever the end of the day comes on this project. But that tool might be useful for communicating both within the board as well as externally who has responsibility for which levels of decisions.
Okay, I will get with her on obtaining that. Thank you for that. So going back to the October workshop, we've had some information on, we want to could it be possible to have some drafts on some of the information we discussed for the workshop, for the board to look at, timetable, and then the overall policy review schedule. What will that look like? And then we also had a comment on basically a sense of the content of the manual in general. Should everything be labeled to be policy, or should it be restructured? And that definitely was something that we look at, and we will ask Weaver to address in the workshop. Like I said, we won't have answers, but we are going to use this for, like I said, a foundation and a guide for that October workshop. So I do have very good expectations of what will come out of the October workshop, and to give us some very good input and direction once the October workshop is finished. But overall, just your feeling or your thoughts, the overall project, what final result, what goal would you like, and also what is your expectation? And I think Chair Scott just mentioned, I think that might be a very good statement you just mentioned, ma'am, on the matrix, is what is the responsibility and whose responsibility? Is it a board responsibility? Is it administration? What responsibility, who does that go to use as a guidepost for us, or benchmark and best practice? But are there any other thoughts on the overall expectation?
I think the board was just look at understanding and making sure that we had regular review. So this all started with that conversation again over a year ago, making sure that the board has on its annual calendar what our review piece is going to be over a 5-year period, 4-year period, whatever that time frame is. So we certainly want that calendar and that schedule to be part of the deliverables on this. But I don't think we were, and then you all were looking at the organization. Is there a better way to organize our existing policies? I don't think any of us were looking at this point at whole-scale changes or big, broad changes to the actual policies. This was, again, what we think is some cleanup work and just making sure the board has that schedule on policy review. So I don't know that other than that we have big whole-scale changes. I see Ms. Hutchison has her mic open.
Yeah, Tammy, I wanted to say something you just mentioned, Carol, about cleanup. I would just like this opportunity to look at the whole policy for consistency. I feel like we look at the policy every now and then, say we had to change this point because something else, it wasn't consistent with something, then 5 pages later. And so I think this is a chance to look at overall, make sure we're consistent and our terminology is the same, and maybe so that future changes to one section will not require changes to every section, something like that. So just an overall consistency.
Okay.
Dr. Sherwood?
One of the things that's occurred to me, and I haven't looked to see if this is all there, but ensuring that whenever a requirement is there because of a SAC COC requirement or a state statute or something, that those are cited for each one.
good notation.
So for example, just make sure I understand what you're saying is so that if we brought multiple policies a couple years ago because of doing some policy, some standards were changed, so we had to make sure that our policies align with some of the new revised standards with SAC COC. So you want to make sure that if we're bringing a policy and it is
a citation,
by standard for SAC citizens. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it's a state statute, then, because we know those come every session, that something will change. And so that citation of why we have this, if it is related to a requirement, either state, federal, or SACs, or whatever. Those are the three that come to mind.
Okay, so to be consistent, just like we brought the policy last month for the changes to Title IX, we made the citations in that particular policy. Just be consistent with that. If it does relate to, make sure we cite whatever agency or accrediting body cite that. Okay.
Yeah, and typically the way I've seen that done, that it's at the end of the policy, it states why it's there and what statute. Not within the body of the text usually, and this is weeds, but just so that it's there.
And then the last thing I would think, again, this is at the end of the project, to have it in a format, to have it in a whatever format we use that can be used in board effect, would be used on our website for external audiences, to have access to and understand how to navigate the college policies and procedures. So whatever tool we use to document and to gather all of this together, make sure that it's going to work in multiple platforms and be searchable for those folks who are looking to try to navigate that for questions or that they may have.
Okay, yes, that's one on my list. Thank you for mentioning that. Anything else as far as what our goals and outcomes for the October workshop or the overall policy project as related to the board's expectations?
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate it.
Board members, I too will echo thank you for slogging through all of this detailed work. It's important work that we do, and it's important to have it in this workshop session so that we can begin to move these ideas forward on the policy revision. There's no closed session item for this meeting, and there's no calendaring for this meeting. So we will reconvene our regular board meeting at 1 p.m., but we are adjourned in our workshop session at 1:54 a.m. Thank you all.